My husband, the CEO, told me, "You're sleeping in the guest room until you say sorry." I just nodded and said, "Okay." The next morning he came in and asked, "Have you learned your lesson?" But when he saw my side of the closet empty and the divorce papers on the table, he finally understood who was really in charge. "Who told you could make a scene tonight?" Ethan hissed across the white linen as the waiters swept past with silver domes. His smile stayed pinned for the table, but his eyes were knives. The crystal near my elbow trembled a little because my hand wasn't as steady as I wanted it on his right. The young woman with the diamond drop earrings pressed 2 fingers to his sleeve like she owned the fabric. She giggled, soft and polished, and said, "Relaxy, she's only teasing." That was the first time I heard the nickname. It didn't sound like business. It sounded like a secret I hadn't agreed to. I didn't start the day expecting to be embarrassed at a table that cost more than my first car. Before we continue, if you believe no woman should ever be silenced, manipulated, or made to apologize for reclaiming her power, make sure to subscribe. It's completely free and helps us share more stories of courage and rebirth, just like Lily's. Now let's see how she turns heartbreak into freedom and builds a life on her own terms. At 5:45 a.m., the penthouse was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the soft click of the elevator down the hall. I measured out Ethan's coffee, 1 heaping scoop of the dark roast, a pinch of cinnamon because his mother swears it helps the heart, 2 drops of vanilla, and set the machine to brew. While it gurgled, I ironed his shirts. The dry cleaner never presses the collars right and Ethan notices. I stood at the board watching the first pale stripe of sunrise slide over Central Park and pressed the steam button like I was smoothing out the day before it had a chance to wrinkle. Before we go on, thank you for being here and sharing in this journey of strength and self-worth. If you believe every woman deserves her voice back, hit subscribe. It's free and truly helps. Now let's see what happens next. The kitchen window gave me back a woman with careful hair and a Paris robe that used to make me feel glamorous. The silk is still lovely. I'm the one who's faded. I laid out Ethan's vitamins in the silver dish his mother gifted us, the one shaped like a leaf, and I found myself counting them twice. Omega-3D magnesium just to keep my hands moving. There was a time when his first sip of coffee and the little pleased sound he made felt like a shared victory. Lately it feels like a score I'm expected to keep without missing a point. He patted in, checked his phone before he looked at me and said, "Dinner tonight. Morrison Industries. You remember who's who?" I nodded. He kissed the air near my cheek. "Good girl." The words landed like a paper cut, small, easy to ignore, still stinging at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. My hairdresser pinned me into the style Ethan calls approachable elegance, which means soft waves that don't move unless the market drops. I had the guest list on my lap and a pen in my hand. I make notes in the margins. Richard Morrison prefers stories about sailing. His wife loves small dogs and hates red meat. The CFO's partner collects teapots. I memorize people the way some women memorize recipes. It's a skill that doesn't show until it saves someone else from choking down. My phone lit up with Sophie Reed's name. We used to walk the reservoir together at dawn. I let it go to voicemail because I didn't have the energy to explain why I always seem busy right when she's free. The manicurist asked if I wanted the bright color or the safe one. I chose the soft pink that goes with everything and says nothing. In the closet, I ran my fingers over the emerald dress that makes my skin look warm. I could hear Ethan in my head. "Green makes you look like you're trying too hard." I zipped myself into the navy he approved last week and practiced my smile in the mirror. Not too wide, not too small. The expression you wear when you're expected to be the room's temperature. The dining room at the hotel smelled like polished wood and truffle oil. The lights were low enough to hide tired faces. The wives clustered in a corner, laughing with a little too much air in their voices, trading updates on schools and summer rentals. I took my spot by Ethan, the position I've held for 12 years, and felt the familiar weight of his hand at the small of my back. That's when she arrived. The young woman moved the way people move when they think a spotlight is a birthright. Her dress was sleek and bright, the kind of fabric that whispers when it passes by. She slid into the space between us with casual ownership. "There you are," she said to him as if I were the one who'd kept her waiting. Ethan introduced her as Sienna, a consultant. He didn't give a last name. "Game changer," he added like a headline. She laughed and touched his elbow as if it were a habit. The board members noticed. Wives notice everything. Sienna called him then B, which sounded private and silly at the same time. I decided to be gracious. I asked where she grew up, what brought her to New York, how long she'd been in strategy. She answered like a person who enjoys being asked questions more than answering them. Then she tilted her head at me. "Do you still get that beautiful eastern light in the master?" she said. "You're lucky. The guest room is lovely too." My napkin slipped. I hadn't mentioned our floor plan. I told myself she was just overeager, the way new people can be when they want to fit fast. I excused the familiarity as youth. I excused the perfume that smelled like grapefruit and something sharper. But she went on admiring the Monet in the study, which is not a Monet, only a print Ethan likes to pretend is important, and describing the view from our terrace as if she'd been there to watch the car lights on Fifth Avenue blur into threads. That it takes a simple sentence to tilt a room. "Lily's an angel for keeping everything running," she said. "He needs that." The wives glanced at me and then at their plates. The soup arrived. A server placed a bowl in front of me, and I stared at the steam because it was easier than staring at my husband. My stomach felt as if I'd missed a stare in the dark. Sienna leaned across Ethan, knuckles grazing his tie. "You did it again," she said, and retied the knot like she'd practiced. That I heard my voice before I had a plan for it. "Do you do that often?" I asked, eyes on her hands. The table quieted the way people do when they sense a fire before they smell smoke. Ethan laughed, that boardroom laugh that can turn a no into a maybe. "Lily," he said, using my name like a warning, not a welcome. I didn't back down. "I'm curious," I added, keeping my tone light. "Is tie straightening part of the consultant package? Or is that one of the premium services?" Someone coughed. A fork clinked too hard against china. The wives focused on buttering invisible bread. The men considered their wine. Sienna's smile stayed, but her eyes cooled. "We're all family here," she said. "Right enough," Ethan said through his teeth, mouth still smiling for the chairman seated opposite. Under the table, he pinched the inside of my arm. Not hard, just a reminder. Years ago, I might have laughed it off. Tonight, the pinch felt like a memo I didn't sign. Conversation resumed in careful pieces, as if everyone had silently agreed to skip the page with the embarrassing paragraph. I took a sip of water. The glass trembled against my lip. To steady myself, I thought of the morning, how the ironing board squeaked when I folded it, how the coffee warmed my palms, how I placed his cuff links on the dresser like 2 small coins. I thought of our 5th anniversary in Paris, the way Ethan looked at me when I came down the hotel staircase in that robe, the way I believed looking at me would always feel like that. Memory can be a soft blanket or a rope burn. Tonight it rubbed raw. Richard Morrison called on Ethan to toast the quarter. Ethan stood tall and handsome and persuasive, thanking everyone for their trust. He praised the team. He praised our partners at the table. His hand drifted towards Sienna for a beat longer than polite. She lifted her glass toward him with a grin designed for photographers. I held mine steady. When he sat, he angled his body toward her, not me. That shift is nothing you can cite in court, but some changes are indictments without paperwork. Dessert arrived. A delicate thing with spun sugar that caught the light. Sienna lifted her phone, snapped a photo of the plate, then turned the camera for a quick selfie with Ethan in the background. "Caption," she murmured. "Winning." I set down my spoon. "Do you have a pet name for my husband?" I asked gently. "Or does he only use the one for you in private?" My voice wasn't loud, but it traveled anyway. The table tilted again, this time like a boat when a wave takes it by surprise. Ethan's smile died first, then his jaw took over. Surprise, then heat, then something flat and final I recognized from the days he fired people over breakfast. "Lily," he said low, "we will discuss your behavior later." The words didn't belong to our marriage. They belonged to his corner office. Sienna opened her mouth, then closed it, then leaned back as if reconsidering her investment. I nodded as if we were talking about a dry agenda item. "Of course," I said. "Make sure to put it on the calendar. I'd hate to be accused of missing a meeting." One of the wives coughed into her napkin to cover a laugh she didn't mean to let out. The CFO stared at his plate as if reading numbers there. The air turned thin. Even the music from the hotel bar seemed to retreat. Ethan didn't speak to me during the car ride home. He typed on his phone. Outside the window, the city flickered through the tinted glass. Inside, I could hear my own breathing. Sienna's perfume, citrus and bite, clung to his jacket. I looked down at my hands folded like a schoolgirl's and thought of the emerald dress hanging quiet in our closet, the one I'd chosen for myself and didn't wear. I wondered when I had started letting other people pick my colors. Back in the penthouse, he went straight to his study, leaving the door open just enough to show me he wasn't hiding, just unavailable. I stood in the kitchen where the morning had been kind. The silver vitamin dish shone under the lights. I washed my lipstick off a glass that wasn't mine and put it away like nothing had happened. From the study, his voice floated out once, calm and practiced as he returned a call. The elevator chimed faintly somewhere down the hall. I set the kettle on for tea, even though I knew I wouldn't drink it. When he finally came to the doorway, jacket off, tie loosened where Sienna's fingers had been, his face was the same one he gives to cameras when he has to talk about losses as if they're opportunities. "We'll address your little outburst," he said. "In due time." I met his eyes and nodded, feeling a strange stillness settle over me. It wasn't peace. It was the space before an answer, wide and waiting. I turned off the kettle that had started to sing and let the apartment go quiet again. The city lights blinked through the glass like a signal I hadn't noticed until now. He didn't move for a long time after those last words. The city's glow broke him into fragments of golden shadow, and I stood there holding my grandmother's coat, wondering when silence had become our most fluent language. The air between us felt too heavy to breathe. He finally exhaled and said in that careful, polished tone he uses when investors are watching, "We'll discuss your behavior." Then he turned his back on me and walked toward the bedroom as if the rest of the night were a meeting he could adjourn at will. The door closed behind him. The click wasn't loud, but it carried the kind of finality that makes your skin prickle. I stood in the hallway for a long time, staring at the reflection of the chandelier on the marble floor. The apartment suddenly seemed too large, too bright, too silent. Somewhere in the distance, a horn blared from the street below. The city kept moving, indifferent, while I felt like someone had pressed pause on my life. When I finally walked into the bedroom, Ethan was still in his tuxedo, sitting at the edge of the bed, scrolling through his phone. The bow tie hung loose, the jacket draped over a chair like a skin he'd shed. He didn't look up when I entered. "You embarrassed me," he said, voice measured and quiet. "In front of my board, in front of Morrison." I didn't answer. The pearls at my ears felt too heavy, so I unclasped them carefully and placed them on the nightstand. My hands shook, not from fear, but from a strange mix of exhaustion and clarity. Ethan finally looked at me then, eyes flat, mouth tight. "You've been reckless, petty. Do you realize what you've done?" He stood and began pacing the way he does before a big negotiation. "I can't have this, Lily. I can't have you jeopardizing everything I've built. Until you can conduct yourself appropriately, you'll stay in the guest room." He might as well have been talking about a business partner who missed a deadline. The words were so sterile, so detached, I almost laughed. But instead I just said, "Okay." He blinked, thrown off by my calm. "You'll stay there until you apologize to me, and to Sienna." That one almost broke my silence. To her, the woman who knew the view from our bedroom. But I swallowed the words, felt that metallic taste rise like biting foil. "Okay," I repeated softly, his eyes narrowed. He wanted a reaction. I gave him none. When I turned away to hang my robe, he muttered something under his breath, something about being ungrateful. I let it fall between us like a stone. That night, I gathered a pillow, a thin blanket, and my phone. The guest room door creaked when I pushed it open. The space smelled faintly of lavender and furniture polish, untouched since my mother's last visit. I stood in the doorway for a moment, realizing this was the first time in 12 years I'd entered a room in my own home without asking, "Will he mind?" The bed was smaller, the mattress firmer. I sat down and let my shoulders drop. The silence wasn't lonely. It was strange but not empty. I could hear the city through the cracked window. A siren somewhere far away, the rhythmic click of a crosswalk signal, the low hum of engines below. Ethan's white noise machine wasn't here to drown it all out. I lay back, fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling. The chandelier's glow leaked faintly through the hallway, forming a soft halo across the wall. For the first time in years, I reached for the lamp and switched it on just because I could. I picked up a novel from the side table, one I'd bought months ago and never dared to open after Ethan said reading before bed made me too distracted. The pages whispered as I turned them. I read until my eyes burned around 3 a.m. I wandered into the guest's bathroom where I'd hidden an old kettle for visitors. I filled it with tap water and waited for it to hum. Steam curled upward, ghostly and light. I poured tea into a mug that said Barnard Alumni, one I'd kept tucked behind the fancy china because Ethan hated mismatched things. The first sip was bitter, too strong, but it tasted like freedom. At some point, I caught my reflection in the mirror. My hair was coming loose, makeup smudged, eyes red, but there was something new there, too. Not beauty, not strength exactly, just me stripped of performance. I'd forgotten what that looked like. I crawled back into bed and pulled the blanket over my shoulders. For the first time in years, I fell asleep without waiting for someone else's breathing to dictate mine. The light through the guest room window was softer, warmer than the filtered glow in our bedroom. It fell across the antique writing desk beneath the window, my grandmother's desk. I hadn't used it since the move. Dust shimmered on its surface. After a shower, I sat down at it with a pen and a pad of stationery from some forgotten hotel that I began writing without thinking. First it was a list. Small things, my practice, my friends, my name. Then larger things, my choices, my time, my peace. Each word felt like dragging out a thorn. My handwriting started neat, then loosened as the ink began to float. I wrote about the charity events. The weekend spent smiling at people who only addressed me as Mrs. Blackwood. The dozen dinners where I laughed at jokes I didn't find funny because I could feel Ethan watching my reactions. By the time I paused, 2 pages were filled. My chest hurt, but it was the ache of air returning after too long underwater. And the bottom drawer of the desk, I found my old address book. The leather was cracked at the spine. I flipped through names I hadn't seen in years, friends, clients, my yoga instructor who once told me I should write again. Between pages, a business card slipped out. Catherine Hale, attorney at law. Her handwriting on the back was small and neat. Just in case you ever wake up. I remembered that charity auction, her steady handshake, the sharp eyes that seemed to see straight through my polite laughter. I hadn't known then what she meant. Now I did. I placed the card in front of me and stared at it. The way you stare at a locked door when you suddenly realize you know where the key is. 6:30 a.m. A knock shattered the quiet. 3 precise raps. He always knocks like that, short, sharp, efficient. Lily. Ethan's voice filtered through the door, smooth but tight. Are you awake? I didn't answer right away. I finished applying my lipstick in the mirror, capped the tube and set it on the dresser. My reflection looked strangely competent for a woman who'd just been demoted in her own home. The door creaked open halfway. Ethan stood there, still in his sleep shirt, jaw freshly shaven, irritation already alive behind his eyes. Have you learned your lesson? I turned slowly, holding my travel mug in both hands. The smell of coffee filled the small room. Which lesson? I asked evenly. You'll have to be specific. Ethan stepped inside, crossing his arms. Don't start. You humiliated me. You're lucky I'm being patient. I glanced at my watch. Patience, I repeated softly. That's what we're calling it now? He frowned, clearly unused to this version of me. His eyes flicked over my outfit. A fitted suit, heels, hair brushed smooth. Why are you dressed like that? You're not going anywhere. I have appointments, I said. What appointments? Important ones. The simplicity of it unsettled him. He searched my face for some hint of weakness, but there was nothing left for him to find. I brushed past him, my shoulder grazing his arm, and headed for the kitchen. He followed me halfway down the hall. Lily, don't be ridiculous. I slipped my travel mug into my bag. Good advice, I said gently. You should try it. He stopped, caught between anger and confusion. You think you can just ignore me? I think, I said, opening the door to the elevator, you'll be surprised by how much I can do. The elevator doors closed before he could reply as the floor numbers dropped. I leaned back against the wall, feeling my heartbeat slow. The reflection staring back at me in the polished steel looked calm, almost serene. I didn't know exactly where I was going yet, but for the first time in years it would be somewhere of my own choosing. When the elevator chimed at the lobby, I stepped out into the cool morning air. The doorman nodded politely, unaware that the woman passing him in a gray suit wasn't Mrs. Blackwood anymore. Not yet anyway, but soon. The morning air felt sharper than usual as I stepped onto Fifth Avenue, the traffic humming like a restless symphony. I hadn't planned where to go first, only that I couldn't go back. The city had a different texture now, clear, electric, alive. Every step away from that penthouse felt like crossing an invisible border. I took the subway for the first time in years, slipping into a corner seat between a woman in scrubs and a man reading the financial section. Nobody looked twice at me, which was oddly comforting. I watched my reflection flicker against the dark tunnel glass. Hair neat, lipstick steady, eyes alert. For the first time, I looked like someone capable of starting over. I found myself standing in front of a glass tower on Lexington Avenue before I'd fully decided to come. 42 floors of polished ambition. Catherine Hale, attorney at law. The nameplate outside her suite gleamed gold. Understated but commanding, I pressed the intercom and heard her assistant's crisp voice. "Miss Hawthorne, Miss Hale is expecting you." The office smelled faintly of leather and old paper, the scent of places where people negotiate lives. Catherine stood behind a desk that seemed to stretch the width of a small stage. She was exactly as I remembered. Tailored navy suit, pearl studs, posture like a ruler. Her eyes, however, were warmer than I expected. "You woke up," she said simply. "I did," I replied, and handed her the folder of notes I'd spent half the night preparing, 17 pages of dates, conversations, receipts. 12 years distilled into evidence. She skimmed quickly, marking with a red pen, the sound of ink scratching like tiny verdicts. Every few minutes she murmured something under her breath. Classic diversion spending. Pattern control behavior. Possible misuse of marital assets. When I mentioned that Ethan had once tried to hire her firm, her brow lifted. "Oh, he did more than try," she said, opening a drawer. "He wanted me to represent him during a merger, but I declined. Conflict of ethics, you could say." She reached into the cabinet and pulled out a folder labeled Blackwood, E. She slid it across the desk with quiet satisfaction. "I've been keeping this. Something told me you might need it." Inside were copies of financial disclosures from years past, public filings, corporate transfers, shell company data. Catherine leaned back. "Men like your husband always think they invented secrecy," she said. "But they forget, secrecy leaves footprints, especially when it comes with a gold Amex card." Her tone carried no judgment, only precision. I found myself breathing easier, as if someone had turned on the lights in a room I didn't realize was dark. By the time we finished, she had a plan. "We'll start with documentation, financial, personal, property. Everything in your name and everything he's hidden. Do not alert him yet." She paused, her gaze softening. "And Lily, don't confuse quiet with weakness. Silence can be strategy." When I left her office, the sky had shifted to a washed-out gray, the kind that made the glass buildings look like mirrors. I could see myself reflected in every surface, steady, upright, no longer small. The next day, I walked into Chase Bank's private client office, a place I'd visited only once before, always at Ethan's side. The receptionist greeted me with a cautious smile. "Mrs. Blackwood?" I hesitated, then said, "Miss Hawthorne." They led me to an office overlooking Park Avenue where a manager named Dana Ortiz introduced herself. She was in her 50s, silver streaks in her bun, eyes sharp but kind. "You said you needed statements?" 3 years, I said. "Everything." She nodded and began typing. Within minutes, the printer hummed to life, spitting out page after page, each one a tiny piece of a puzzle I hadn't known existed. I flipped through the sheets, and my stomach turned. Jewelry purchases from Tiffany's on my birthday, none of which I'd received. Hotel charges at the St. Regis, the Ritz, the Carlyle, always during his so-called conferences. Then, tucked among business expenses, a line made me pause. Personal training services, Sienna Cole. I stared at the amount, monthly, steady, hidden under wellness. I felt Dana watching me. She didn't ask questions, but her silence was the kind that understood too much. "There's more," she said gently. "ATM withdrawals. Always Tuesday afternoons. Exact amounts. It's patterned." I hadn't noticed. I'd been too busy managing his calendar, his dinners, his public smile. The tears came without warning. quiet but unstoppable. Dana wordlessly slid a box of tissues across the desk. "You're not the first woman to come in here with this look," she said softly. "But you might be one of the few who walks out stronger." I wiped my eyes and exhaled. "I need new accounts," I said, voice steadying. "Ones he can't touch." She smiled approvingly. "Let's make that happen." We set up everything under my maiden name. New passwords, new security phrases, new beginnings disguised as banking tasks. When I left, Dana handed me a folder and said, "Keep this safe. And remember, money tells the truth. People won't." 2 days later, I returned to the penthouse while Ethan was at work. The place smelled faintly of cedar polish and his cologne, the remnants of a man who thought ownership meant permanence. The sommelier arrived precisely at noon, a tall man with silver hair and the calm authority that comes from decades among bottles older than both of us combined. "Mr. Blackwood requested I appraise the collection last year," he said, setting up his clipboard. "I wasn't aware," I replied. He chuckled. "They rarely tell the wives. But I'm glad it's you I'm working with today." We moved through the temperature-controlled cellar together. He read off labels like sacred verses. Chateau Margaux, Petrus, Lafite, Rothschild. Then he paused at one empty slot. "The 1982 Margaux, beautiful case, delivered to a Tribeca address last month." I froze. "Tribeca?" "Yes," he said casually, "for what Mr. Blackwood described as a client event. Though I recall that address belongs to a residential building, not an office." He didn't elaborate further, but the unspoken words hung in the air like condensation. By the time he finished cataloging, the collection's worth was staggering. He photographed each label, documenting everything meticulously. Before leaving, he handed me a copy of the list. "You'll want this," he said. "In my experience, the wife usually gets the collection in the end." He smiled ruefully. "Men who cheat always underestimate the inventory." After he left, I walked through the penthouse slowly. Every object seemed to hum with new meaning, the art, the rugs, even the untouched piano. None of it felt like his anymore. That evening, as I waited in the lobby for a delivery truck, Mr. Brooks, the doorman, spotted me. "Evening, Ms." He paused, uncertain, then smiled. "Miss Hawthorne." I blinked, surprised. "You remembered?" He shrugged. "Always liked that name better." He hesitated, glancing toward the elevator before lowering his voice. "I've been keeping something for you." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small black notebook. The cover was creased, corners bent from use. "Started this about a year ago. Didn't feel right what I was seeing. Thought you might need it someday." Inside were neat handwritten notes, dates, times, little details. "Returned with young blonde, not Mrs. B. Left 11 p.m. said emergency meeting. Back 6 a.m. delivered flowers to lobby for a Miss Cole. My throat tightened. "Mr. Brooks, why?" He rubbed his neck awkwardly. "Ma'am, you were always kind. You'd ask about my daughter when nobody else remembered her name. I figured if things ever went wrong up there, you'd need someone who saw it all." I closed the notebook gently. "Thank you," I said. The words felt too small. He smiled faintly. "Just glad to see you standing taller these days." As I stepped outside to meet the moving truck, the city wind swept across my face. Cool, alive, and honest. For years I'd thought silence kept the peace. But silence had only kept me invisible. Now every truth I uncovered felt like a brick in the foundation of something new. The driver called my name and I turned, notebook clutched to my chest. The headlights reflected in the glass doors behind me, and for the first time I saw not Mrs. Blackwood, but Lily Hawthorne standing on her own ground. The driver waved. "Miss Hawthorne? You ready?" I nodded. We didn't load furniture. Not yet. Just a few boxes marked personal. I labeled them in neat handwriting, each word steady. Records. Documents. Letters. The rest would come later, in motion too quiet for anyone to notice. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the guest room window with the city glittering below and opened the notebook again. The entries stretched back farther than I'd expected. Dinners, missed holidays, late-night arrivals. It was all there, every tiny betrayal logged in someone else's careful hand. The anger that came wasn't hot. It was cold, clean, decisive. It felt like focus.by morning. The plan had shape. I needed help, the kind that didn't flinch at quiet operations. So when the sun came up, I called a number scribbled at the back of Catherine's folder. Mark Jensen, discreet relocations. His voice was low and calm, the kind of tone that makes chaos sound manageable. You're the one Catherine mentioned, he said. We specialize in sensitive extractions. Extractions? I repeated, almost laughing. Moving people out of situations they've outgrown, he clarified. We'll do it clean. No trace. I glanced at the notebook on the table, then at the skyline. I want to keep everything documented, cataloged, and gone by the time he realizes what's happening. Mark's reply was simple. Then we'll need a blueprint. That afternoon, I sat at my grandmother's desk again. I drew floor plans, each room labeled, marked with color-coded symbols. Blue for what to pack, X for what to leave behind, stars for what mattered most. Every stroke of the pen felt like reclaiming territory I hadn't realized I'd surrendered. When I was done, I pinned the map to the wall and looked at it as the afternoon light shifted across the page. The penthouse wasn't his fortress anymore. It was a chessboard, and for once I knew all the moves. My phone buzzed. A message from Mark. We're in tomorrow at 7. Code phrase. Groceries delivered. I stared at the screen and smiled faintly. Tomorrow, I thought. I start taking my life out of this place. One box, one truth, one room at a time. Thursday arrived wrapped in the quiet hum of purpose. The morning light slipped through the blinds, spilling over the blueprint still pinned to the wall. Every mark I'd drawn, every X and star, waited like a silent agreement between the woman I had been and the one I was becoming. At exactly 7 a.m., Mark Jensen's text appeared on my phone. Groceries delivered. I took a breath, replied with dinner ready, and set the plan in motion. A white van pulled into the private garage 30 minutes later, logoed Anderson's Flowers. To the building staff, it looked like another delivery for one of Ethan's corporate events. To me, it was a rescue disguised in roses. Mark and his partner Aaron Blake were precise and professional. Aaron was small and wiry, hair tucked under a baseball cap, her movements quick and silent. We'll keep everything low noise, she said, scanning the blueprint taped on the wall. You've done half our work already. They started with the smallest things. The photos, the jewelry box I'd once hidden behind a stack of linens, the slim binder of documents Catherine had labeled leverage. Each item went into gray crates, tagged and logged. No chaos, no sound, just quiet efficiency. I packed too methodically. The framed picture from our wedding. Ethan's smile looked forced now that I knew what to see. The hand-painted teacups from my grandmother. The first edition books my father gave me the year he died. I wrapped each one in tissue like a ritual, not a departure. When we reached the kitchen, Aaron glanced at a copper watering can by the window. This one. I nodded. It's coming with me. It wasn't expensive, but it had watered every plant in every apartment we'd ever lived in. Tiny green testaments that I'd cared for, something that grew. In the study, I found the safe, Ethan's pride and paranoia. He'd once bragged about its encryption system. I remembered his passcode though. He thought anniversaries were sentimental trivia, not security risks. I entered the date of our wedding. The click was softer than expected. Inside, 2 passports, birth certificates, a prenuptial agreement thick with legal arrogance, and a velvet box containing my grandmother's emerald ring. The one Ethan had claimed was lost during a renovation. My throat tightened. I held it to the light, watching the green catch fire again. Welcome back, I whispered. Mark raised an eyebrow. That everything you want from in there? Almost, I said. I left the prenup where it was and added a single envelope on top, white sealed, addressed simply to Ethan. Inside were the divorce papers and Catherine's summary of his financial misconduct. Paper bullets. I returned to the guest room one last time. On the desk sat a cream envelope, already stamped and waiting. It contained 6 handwritten words, my entire message to him. You taught me silence too well. I placed it beside the coffee maker, knowing that's where he'd see it first. By noon, the penthouse looked untouched, but hollow somehow. Aaron straightened the last cushion. No trace, she said. You'd think no one ever lived here. That's the idea, I replied. When the van door slid shut, the sound echoed like a punctuation mark. I didn't look back as the city swallowed us whole. We drove to a quiet boutique hotel near the river. The manager, a friend of Catherine's, checked me into Suite 407 under my maiden name. The curtains were soft gray, the bed freshly made, the air faintly floral. It didn't smell like wealth, it smelled like breathing. That evening, I sat by the window with my laptop open and a mug of chamomile tea cooling beside me. Across the river, the skyline glittered like glass teeth. I typed an email to Catherine. It's done. All items secured. He'll discover it tonight. Her reply came within minutes. Good. Stay where you are. Do not respond to any contact from him. Tomorrow morning we release everything to the board. I closed the laptop and pressed my palms together. The silence around me wasn't suffocating now. It was earned at 8:47 p.m. My phone began buzzing on the table. Ethan Blackwood, incoming call. It rang 5 times before I switched the screen face down. A second later, a message appeared. Where are you? What have you done? I didn't answer. I simply watched the message fade into the lock screen. Its light dimming against the window's reflection. By midnight. My life had been condensed into 10 labeled crates and a single folder of evidence. Outside, rain began to fall against the glass, thin and constant, washing the night clean. I turned off the lamp and whispered into the darkness, not as a curse but as a declaration. Tomorrow, he learns what quiet can do. By the time Ethan came home that night, the penthouse had already begun to echo. The drawers were too light, the closets too orderly. He called my name once, then again, each time louder, sharper. When no answer came, he stalked through every room, slamming open doors, searching for the chaos he expected. There was none. Only stillness. Then he saw the envelope on the counter beside the coffee maker. He tore it open, eyes narrowing as he read the 6 words I'd left. You taught me silence too well. He threw it onto the marble, the sound sharp as glass breaking. Then he stormed into his study, yanking open the safe. The ring box was gone, the prenup and documents rearranged, the divorce papers waiting neatly where his secrets had once been. When the realization hit, it wasn't loud. It was the quiet collapse of control. He sank into his chair and stared at the folder Catherine Hale had prepared. Legal phrasing that translated to exposure, investigation, and consequences. His phone buzzed over and over, unknown numbers, emails, alerts from the board. He didn't know yet that the leak was already in motion across town. I sat in Suite 407, listening to the rain tap against the glass. Catherine had called earlier to confirm the delivery of all materials to the Morrison board and the company's auditors. They'll see the paper trail tonight, she'd said. By morning, they'll realize what he's been funneling into his consultant's pocket. Her voice had held a note of triumph, but also warning. Expect noise, Lily. Men like him, when their world tips, they don't go quietly. She was right. 10:16 p.m. My phone began to light up again. Calls, voicemails, messages stacked like an avalanche. I muted it and let it ring itself into exhaustion. I wasn't scared, only tired. Around midnight, the doorbell rang. My heart stuttered, but when I checked the camera feed, it was Eleanor Hawthorne, my mother, holding an umbrella. I let her in, and the smell of rain and comfort came with her. She set a small paper bag on the counter. Tea, she said. Chamomile. And courage. I smiled faintly. I already have plenty of that, thanks to you. She studied my face, the steady calm I wore like armor. He'll come undone, she warned softly. Be ready for that. I am, I said. He's already unraveling. We sat together for an hour, quietly sipping tea while the storm thickened outside. When she left, she kissed my forehead. Don't let him define the ending, she whispered. Morning came with breaking news. Blackwood and Morrison board announces emergency session. Catherine called just after dawn. He's suspended pending investigation, she said. They found the duplicate ledgers, the unauthorized consultant payments, the hotel invoices, all of it. For a long moment I said nothing. Then I asked, and Sienna? Catherine exhaled. Terminated. He put everything in her name to cover his trail. She's calling, begging for immunity. She'll probably call you next. And she did. 18 noon, my phone buzzed again. This time I answered. Lily, please. Sienna's voice cracked, stripped of all its polished charm. They froze my accounts. He told me it was all above board. I didn't know. You didn't know, I repeated quietly. You just spent his money and wore my ring. I'm sorry, she whispered. I was stupid. I almost laughed, not cruelly, but with the strange lightness that comes when something finally makes sense. You were complicit, Sienna. But you don't have to stay that way. There was a pause, then a soft broken sound. What should I do? Tell the truth, I said. And never mistake flattery for love again. I hung up before she could answer. By afternoon, the building's security team called to confirm that Ethan had attempted to remove several boxes from the penthouse. Catherine's firm had already filed an injunction. He was cornered in every way that mattered. That evening he requested mediation. I agreed, but only in neutral ground. The conference room at Hale & Associates was glass-walled, sunlit, and cold. He arrived first, a shadow of himself, sleepless, unshaven, all polish gone. When I entered, his jaw tightened. Lily, he started, voice cracking slightly. This isn't you. I sat across from him, hands folded. You're right. This isn't the version of me you built. He flinched. You've destroyed everything. I met his eyes. No, Ethan. You did that. I just turned on the lights so everyone could see. He slammed his hand on the table. Do you have any idea what this will cost me? Yes, I said softly. Exactly what I paid for all those years of silence. For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking of the wall clock. Then Catherine entered, documents in hand. If we're ready, she said, sliding the settlement papers forward. Let's finalize the transfer of assets. Ethan stared down at the pen like it might explode. You really planned all this, he said. No, I replied. You did. You just never imagined I'd be smart enough to finish it. He signed. The scratch of ink was quieter than I expected, almost gentle when it was done. He stood, searching my face for some trace of regret. There was none. I hope you're happy, he said bitterly. I rose slowly, gathering the documents. I am. For the first time, I don't need your permission to be. He left without another word, the echo of his footsteps fading down the corridor. Catherine looked at me, a small proud smile forming. You handled that beautifully. I exhaled, feeling the weight lift from my chest. It's strange, I said. I thought victory would feel louder. Quiet victories last longer, she replied. As I stepped outside into the late afternoon light, the air smelled of rain and something cleaner, possibility. The city was still loud, indifferent, but this time the noise belonged to the world, not to him. For the first time in years, my silence was mine to keep or to break, whenever I chose. 3 months later, I stood in a very different hallway. The courthouse, sunlight slanting through tall windows, dust motes drifting like soft punctuation marks between chapters of my life. I wore the emerald dress Ethan once claimed made me too bold. The fabric skimmed my knees as if even it understood freedom. Beside me stood Catherine Hale, calm and radiant in navy, reading glasses perched low on her nose, papers tucked under her arm like a shield she wielded with precision. When the clerk called my case, we stepped into the courtroom together. The judge, a woman with silver hair and steady eyes, looked up from the file. Miss Hawthorne, she said, letting the name linger in the air like a final correction. Are you ready to finalize? I met her gaze and said clearly, I am. The proceedings were quick. Signatures, seals, and a single resonant stamp that sounded like a gavel against my bones. The decree restored my name, my property, my quiet. When the judge handed the final document across the bench, she gave me a small, knowing smile. Congratulations, she said. May this be a beginning, not an ending. Outside, the winter sun had a gentleness to it, the kind that made even cold days forgiving. Catherine squeezed my hand as we walked down the courthouse steps. We didn't just win, she said softly. We reclaimed. A week later, I used the new key that turned smoothly in the penthouse lock. The apartment greeted me with still air and clean walls, stripped of his scent, his noise, his shadow. Boxes labeled Hawthorne lined the guest room, my room now. I opened one and found my grandmother's fountain pen, ink still flowing as if waiting for my hand. At the kitchen counter, I brewed coffee exactly the way I liked it. Dark roast, no cinnamon, no permission needed. The silence was full, not emptied. It didn't take long for life to find its new rhythm. A month after the decree, I signed a lease on a modest second-floor office on the Upper West Side. Sunlight poured through tall windows that didn't need curtains. I peeled off the protective film from the door plaque myself, pressing on the gold letters. Lily Hawthorne LSW, Consultation and Advocacy, my degree. Once stored in a forgotten drawer, now hung framed on the wall. The space smelled like fresh paint and beginning. I furnished it simply: soft gray chairs, a round rug, a small bookshelf lined with stories of courage and reinvention. The receptionist, a warm-eyed woman named Tessa, greeted every visitor with peppermint tea and the kind of smile that steadies people. My first client arrived on a Tuesday morning, coat buttoned to her throat, hands clenched in her lap. She'd read about my case in the paper, the quiet exposé about corporate fraud, marital deceit, and the woman who had walked away with both her dignity and her company shares intact. "How did you know you were ready?" she asked, eyes fixed on the floor. "I didn't," I said honestly. "I just knew I wasn't willing to stay." By the end of that week, there were 3 more clients. By the end of the month, 12. Women who had been silenced by wealth, by fear, by love disguised as control. We built plans together: financial strategies, exit routes, safety nets. My desk became an arsenal of binders and quiet revolutions. One morning, a pale green envelope arrived in the mail. Inside was a handwritten note in looping, hopeful script. "Lily, I'm in Vermont now, running a small yoga studio. Thank you for reminding me that leaving isn't failure. It's survival. Sienna. Tucked inside was a photograph. Her in a wool sweater beside a wooden sign that read Mountain Breath Yoga. Her smile was unguarded, her eyes her own again. I didn't write back. I didn't need to. By spring, I'd finished the manuscript Catherine had encouraged me to write, The Guest Room Revolution. The publisher chose the same hotel ballroom for the launch that once hosted Ethan's gala. The same place where I'd been humiliated. This time the stage was mine. Rows of women filled the seats, their faces expectant, brave, familiar. My mother sat in the front row, Tessa beside her. Even Eleanor came, dressed in quiet elegance, pride flickering behind her restraint. When I stepped to the microphone, the room hushed. I used to think silence kept the peace. I began. But silence only keeps you small. The moment I stopped apologizing for breathing, that's when my story began. Applause swelled like a tide. For once I didn't shrink from it. I let it wash over me, warm and human. Later, I signed copies until my hand cramped. One reader leaned in and whispered, "You showed me that walking away can be its own kind of justice." That night I returned to the penthouse, my home, and stood by the window where I'd once watched my old life unravel. The city glowed like 1,000 second chances. On the dresser, the emerald ring caught the lamplight, throwing a soft green reflection across the wall. I slipped it on, not as a symbol of ownership, but of continuation. Then I turned off the lamp, pulled the covers up and listened, not for his footsteps, not for approval, but for my own steady heartbeat keeping time with the hum of the city below. When morning came, I made pancakes with my mother and brewed coffee strong enough to taste like victory. Looking at my reflection in the kitchen window, hair loose, smile unforced, I finally understood. The person who controls the boardroom isn't always the one who controls the board. Sometimes it's the woman who walks away, piece by piece, until the whole empire she builds belongs entirely to herself. My favorite part was when Lily calmly placed those divorce papers on Ethan's desk and walked away with her head held high. What was your favorite moment of justice in her story? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more empowering stories of freedom, courage, and self-worth. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.